And many in America thought that relations between Russia and the United States would be fine with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, that the opposite happened. But you've never explained why you think that happened, except to say that the West fears a strong Russia, but we have a strong China the West does not seem very afraid of. What about Russia do you think convinced policymakers they had to take it down?
Запад боится сильного Китая больше, чем сильной России.
The West is afraid of strong China more than it fears a strong Russia, because Russia has 150 million people and China has 1.5 billion population, and its economy is growing by leaps and bounds, or 5% a year. It used to be even more. But that's enough for China. As Bismarck once put it, potentials are the most important. China's potential is enormous. It is the biggest economy in the world today in terms of purchasing power parity and the size of the economy. It has already overtaken the United States quite a long time ago, and it is growing at a rapid clip. Let's not talk about who is afraid of whom. Let's not reason in such terms. And let's get into the fact that after 1991, when Russia expected that it would be welcomed into the brotherly family of civilized nations, nothing like this happened. You tricked us. I don't mean you personally when I say you. Of course, I'm talking about the United States. The promise was that NATO would not expand eastward, but it happened 5 times. There were 5 waves of expansion. We tolerated all that. We were trying to persuade them. We were saying, please don't. We are as bourgeois now as you are. We are market economy and there is no communist party power. Let's negotiate. Moreover, I have also said this publicly before. There was a moment when a certain rift started growing between us. Before that, Yeltsin came to the United States. Remember, he spoke in Congress and said the good words. God bless America. Everything he said were signals. Let us in. Remember the developments in Yugoslavia before the Yeltsin was lavished with praise? As soon as the developments in Yugoslavia started, he raised his voice in support of Serbs, and we couldn't but raise our voices for Serbs in their defense. I understand that there were complex processes underway there, I do, but Russia could not help raising its voice in support of Serbs, because Serbs are also a special and close to us nation, with Orthodox culture and so on. It's a nation that has suffered so much for generations. Well, regardless, what is important is that Yeltsin expressed his support. What did the United States do? In violation of international law and the UN Charter, it started bombing Belgrade. It was the United States that let the genie out of the bottle. At a meeting here in the Kremlin with the outgoing President Bill Clinton, right here in the next room, I said to him, I asked him, Bill, do you think if Russia asked to join NATO, do you think it would happen? Suddenly he said, you know, it's interesting. I think so. But in the evening, when we met for dinner, he said, you know, I've talked to my team. No, it's not possible now. You can ask him. I think he will watch our interview. He'll confirm it.
So twice you've described U.S. presidents making decisions and then being undercut by their agency heads. So it sounds like you're describing a system that's not run by the people who are elected, in your telling.
That's right. In the end, they just told us to get lost. I'm not going to tell you the details because I think it's incorrect. After all, it was confidential conversation. But our proposal was declined. That's a fact. It was right then when I said, look, but then we will be forced to take countermeasures. We will create such strike systems that will certainly overcome missile defense systems. The answer was, we are not doing this against you, and you do what you want, assuming that it is not against us, not against the United States. I said, okay. Very well. That's the way it went. And we created hypersonic systems with intercontinental range, and we continue to develop them. We are now ahead of everyone, the United States and the other countries, in terms of the development of hypersonic strike systems, and we are improving them every day. But it wasn't us. We proposed to go the other way. and we were pushed back.
По поводу расширения НАТО на восток.
Now,
Ну,
about
обещали.
NATO's expansion to the
Никакого
east.
НАТО на восток.
Well, we were promised no NATO to the east, not an inch to the east, as we were told. And then what?
Что сказать? Ну,
They said, well, it's not enshrined on paper, so we'll expand.
5 расширений.
So there were 5 waves of expansion: the Baltic states, the whole of Eastern Europe, and so on.
И вот теперь главное.
And now I come to the main thing. They have come to the Ukraine, ultimately. In 2008, at the summit in Bucharest, they declared that the doors for Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO were open. The US told us, calm Yanukovych down, and we will calm the opposition. Let the situation unfold in the scenario of a political settlement. We said, all right, agreed, let's do it this way. As the Americans requested, Yanukovych did use neither the armed forces nor the police, yet the armed opposition committed a coup in Kiev.
Провела госпереворот.
What is that supposed to mean?
Как это понимать?
Who do you think you are?
Вы кто такие?
I wanted to ask the then US leadership.
With the backing of whom?
При поддержке ЦРУ, конечно.
With the backing of CIA, of course.
Которые, как я понимаю,
The organization you wanted to join back in the day, as I understand.
хотя это серьезная организация.
We should thank God they didn't let you in. Although, it is a serious organization. I understand.
Итак, в 2008
So,
году
in 2008, the doors of NATO were opened for Ukraine. In 2014, there was a coup. They started persecuting those who did not accept the coup, and it was indeed a coup. They created a threat to Crimea, which we had to take under our protection. They launched the war in Donbass in 2014 with the use of aircraft and artillery against civilians. This is when it all started. There is a video of aircraft attacking Donetsk from above. They launched a large-scale military operation, then another one. When they failed, they started to prepare the next one. All this against the background of military development of this territory and opening of NATO's doors. How could we not express concern over what was happening? From our side, this would have been a culpable negligence. That's what it would have been. It's just that the US political leadership pushed us to the line we could not cross, because doing so could have ruined Russia itself. By the way, back then the representatives of 3 European countries, Germany, Poland and France, arrived. They were the guarantors of the signed agreement between the government of Yanukovych and the opposition. They signed it as guarantors. Despite that, the opposition committed a coup, and all these countries pretended that they didn't remember that they were guarantors of the peaceful settlement. They just threw it in the stove right away, and nobody recalls that. And what triggered the latest events? Firstly, the current Ukrainian leadership declared that it would not implement the Minsk agreements, which had been signed, as you know, after the events of 2014 in Minsk, where the plan of peaceful settlement in Donbass was set forth. But no, the current Ukrainian leadership, foreign minister, all other officials, and then president himself said that they don't like anything about the Minsk agreements. In other words, they were not going to implement it. A year or a year and a half ago, former leaders of Germany and France said openly to the whole world that they indeed signed the Minsk agreements, but they never intended to implement them. They simply led us by the nose. These agreements were complicated for Ukraine. They included lots of elements of those Donbass territories' independence. That's true. However, I was absolutely confident, and I'm saying this to you now. I honestly believe that if we managed to convince the residents of Donbass, and we had to work hard to convince them to return to the Ukrainian statehood, then gradually the wounds would start to heal. When this part of territory reintegrated itself into a common social environment, when the pensions and social benefits were paid again, all the pieces would gradually fall into place. No, nobody wanted that. Everybody wanted to resolve the issue by military force only.
с помощью
But we could not let that happen. And the situation got to the point when the Ukrainian side announced, no, we will not do anything. They also started preparing for military action. It was they who started the war in 2014. Our goal is to stop this war. And we did not start this war in 2022. This is an attempt to stop it.
Германия говорит, ну как ты себе представляешь, как они будут подписывать?
How can you imagine them signing a treaty with a gun to their heads? The troops should be pulled back from Kiev. I said, all right. We withdrew the troops from Kiev.
Извините, от Киева.
As soon as we pulled back our troops from Kiev, our Ukrainian negotiators immediately threw all our agreements reached in Istanbul into the bin
Договоренности, достигнутые в Стамбуле.
and got prepared for a long-standing armed confrontation with the help of the United States and its satellites in Europe.
Вот.
That is how the situation has developed. And that is how it looks now. You say Hitler has been dead for so many years, 80 years. But his example lives on. People who exterminated Jews, Russians, and Poles are alive. And the president, the current president of today's Ukraine, applauds him in the Canadian Parliament, gives a standing ovation. Can we say that we have completely uprooted this ideology if what we see is happening today? That is what denazification is in our understanding. We have to get rid of those people who maintain this concept and support this practice and try to preserve it. That is what denazification is about.
Do you think NATO is worried about this becoming a global war or a nuclear conflict?
At least that's what they're talking about. And they're trying to intimidate their own population with an imaginary Russian threat. This is an obvious fact. And thinking people, not Philistines, but thinking people, analysts, those who are engaged in real politics, just smart people, understand perfectly well that this is a fake. They're trying to fuel the Russian threat.
Well, the argument, I know you know this, is that, well, he invaded Ukraine, he has territorial aims across the continent, and you're saying unequivocally you don't.
Абсолютно, это абсолютно исключено.
It is absolutely out of the question. You just don't have to be any kind of analyst. It goes against common sense to get involved in some kind of a global war.
Глобальная война поставить на грань.
And a global war will bring all humanity to the brink of destruction. It's obvious. Do the United States need this? What for?
Национальной территории. У вас нечем заниматься.
Thousands of miles away from your national territory.
На границе полно. Проблемы с
Don't you have anything better to do?
государством.
You have issues on the border, issues with migration, issues with the national debt, more than $33 trillion. You have nothing better to do, so you should fight in Ukraine?
Понимая ситуацию, которая складывается.
Wouldn't it be better to negotiate with Russia? Make an agreement, already understanding the situation that is developing today, realizing that Russia will fight for its interests to the end?
К здравому смыслу.
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
I was busy that day. Nate, do you have I did not blow up Nord Stream. Thank you, though.
У вас лично, может быть, есть алиби. У вас лично.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi. But people always say in such cases, look for someone who is interested. But in this case, we should not only look for someone who is interested, but also for someone who has capabilities. Because there may be many people interested, but not all of them are capable of sinking to the bottom of the Baltic Sea and carrying out this explosion. These two components should be connected. Who is interested and who is capable of doing it?
Okay, so if you had evidence, and presumably given your security services, your intel services, you would, that NATO, the US, CIA, the West, did this, why wouldn't you present it and win a propaganda victory?
В войне пропаганды очень сложно.
In the war of propaganda, it is very difficult to defeat the United States because the United States controls all the world's media and many European media. The ultimate beneficiary of the biggest European media are American financial institutions. Don't you know that? So it is possible to get involved in this work, but it is cost prohibitive, so to speak. We can simply shine the spotlight on our sources of information, and we will not achieve results. It is clear to the whole world what happened, and even American analysts talk about it directly. It's true.
Yes. Well, let's just give one example, the US dollar, which has kind of united the world in a lot of ways, maybe not to your advantage, but certainly to ours. Is that going away as the reserve currency, the universally accepted currency? How have sanctions, do you think, changed the dollar's place in the world?
Вы знаете, это одна из грубейших
You know, to use the dollar as a tool of foreign policy struggle is one of the biggest strategic mistakes made by the US political leadership.
Это основа основ могущества США.
The dollar is the cornerstone of the United States power. I think everyone understands very well that no matter how many dollars are printed, they are quickly dispersed all over the world. But they won't stop printing. What does the debt of $33 trillion tell us about? It is about the emission.
Как только политическое руководство приняло решение использовать доллар в качестве инструмента политической борьбы.
Nevertheless, it is the main weapon used by the United States to preserve its power across the world. As soon as the political leadership decided to use the US dollar as a tool of political struggle, a blow was dealt to this American power. But the fact that the United States applies restrictive measures to certain countries, such as placing restrictions on transactions, freezing assets, etc., causes grave concern and sends a signal to the whole world. Today, 34% of our transactions are made in rubles, and about as much, a little over 34% in yuan. Why did the United States do this? My only guess is self-conceit. They probably thought it would lead to full collapse, but nothing collapsed. Moreover, other countries, including oil producers, are thinking of and already accepting payments for oil in yuan. Do you even realize what is going on or not? Does anyone in the United States realize this? What are you doing? You are cutting yourself off. All experts say this. Ask any intelligent and thinking person in the United States what the dollar means for the US.
But
You're killing it with your own hands. As for BRICS, where Russia took over the presidency this year, the BRICS countries are, by and large, developing very rapidly. Look, if memory serves me right, back in 1992, the share of the G7 countries in the world economy amounted to 47%, whereas in 2022 it was down to, I think, a little over 30%. The BRICS countries accounted for only 16% in 1992, but now their share is greater than that of the G7. It has nothing to do with the events in Ukraine. This is due to the trends of global development and world economy, as I mentioned just now. And this is inevitable. This will keep happening. It is like the rise of the sun. You cannot prevent the sun from rising. You have to adapt to it. How do the United States adapt? With the help of force, sanctions, pressure, bombings, and use of armed forces. Look, why, in my opinion, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, such an erroneous, crude, completely unjustified policy of pressure was pursued against Russia? After all, this is a policy of pressure. NATO expansion, support for the separatists in Caucasus, creation of a missile defense system. These are all elements of pressure. Pressure, pressure, pressure. Then, dragging Ukraine into NATO is all about pressure, pressure, pressure. Why?
But do you think at this point, as of February 2024, he has the latitude, the freedom to speak with you or your government directly about putting an end to this, which clearly isn't helping his country or the world? Can he do that, do you think?
Ну, а почему нет? Он же
Why
считается
not?
главой государства.
He considers himself head of
Мы
state.
считаем в
He
России,
won
что
the
всё, что
elections.
произошло после 2014
Although we
года,
believe in Russia that the coup d'etat
первичным
is the
источником
primary
власти
source of
является
power
министр
for
обороны.
everything
И в
that
этом смысле
happened
даже
after
сегодняшняя власть
2014.
является ущербной.
And in this
Но,
sense,
он
even
считает
today,
себя
government
президентом,
is flawed.
в этом качестве его признают.
But he considers himself the
Соединенные Штаты,
president,
вся
and
Европа,
he is recognized by the United States, all of Europe, and practically the rest of the world in such a capacity. Why not? He
Договорились,
can.
он же знал об этом. Более
We
того,
negotiated with
руководитель
Ukraine in
переговорной
Istanbul.
группы
We agreed.
Арахамия, по-моему,
He was aware of this.
до сих пор
Moreover,
возглавляет,
the
фракцию,
negotiation group leader, Mr.
правящей
Arahamia
партии,
is his
правя-
last name,
правящей партии.
I believe still heads the faction of the ruling party, the party of the president in the Rada.
Президента в Раде, в
He still heads the
парламенте.
presidential faction in the Rada, the
Он даже
country's
поставил свою
parliament.
подпись
He still sits there.
на этом документе.
He even put his preliminary
Потом
signature
он
on the
же
document
публично
I am
на весь
telling
мир
you
заявил,
about.
«Мы были
But then
готовы
he
подписать».
publicly stated
Но
to the
приехал
whole
господин
world,
Джонсон,
we were ready to
тогда
sign this
премьер-министр
document,
Великобритании,
but Mr.
отговорил
Johnson,
нас об
then
этом
the Prime
и
Minister
сказал,
of
что
Great
лучше
Britain,
воевать с Россией.
came and
Они нам всё
dissuaded us
дадут
from
для
doing
того,
this,
чтобы
saying it
вернули
was better to fight
утраченное,
Russia. They would give everything needed for us to return what was lost during the clashes with Russia,
согласились с этим
and we
предложением.
agreed with this proposal. Look,
Опубликовано.
his statement has
Он
been
сказал это
published. He
публично.
said it publicly.
Могут они к
Can
этому
they
вернуться?
return to this or
То есть
not?
это вопрос.
The
Хотят они или
question
нет.
is, do they
А
want
после
it or
этого
not?
еще господин президент
Further on, President of Ukraine issued a decree
декрет,
prohibiting
запрещающий
negotiations
вести
with
переговоры.
us.
Ну пусть он отменит
Let
этот
him
декрет.
cancel that
Мы же не
decree,
отказывались никогда.
and that's it.
Вот нам всё
We have
время
never
говорят,
refused
«А кого Россия
negotiations,
готова?» Да
indeed.
мы не отказывались.
We hear all the
Они же
time, is
публично-
Russia
публично
ready?
отказали.
Yes, we have not refused. It
Пускай
was them
отменит
who
свой
publicly
декрет и
refused.
вступайте в переговоры.
Well, let him cancel his
То,
decree
что они
and enter
подчинились
into negotiations.
либо уговорам
We have never
бывшего
refused.
премьер-министра Великобритании господина Джонсона,
And the fact that they obeyed the demand or persuasion of Mr. Johnson, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain,
потому что,
seems ridiculous and very sad to
господин
me,
Арахамия, мы еще
because, as
полтора года назад
Mr.
могли
Arakamia put it,
прекратить эти
we could have stopped those hostilities with war a year and a half ago already.
и мы от этого отказались.
But the British persuaded us and we refused
А
this.
война продолжается.
Where is Mr. Johnson now? And the war continues.
So when does the AI empire start, do you think?
У меня все в более
You're
сложные
asking
вопросы.
increasingly more
погружаетесь.
complicated questions. To answer them, you need to be an expert in big
Для того,
numbers,
чтобы
big
ответить,
data,
надо
and
быть, конечно,
AI.
специалистом в
Mankind is
сфере
currently
чисел,
facing many threats.
в сфере вот
Due
этой
to the genetic researches, it is now possible to create a superhuman, a specialized human being, a genetically engineered athlete, scientist, military man. There are reports that Elon Musk has already had a chip implanted in the human brain in the USA.
Илон Маск внедрил уже чип в мозг какого-то человека.
What do you think of that?
Ну, Маска, я думаю, что Маска остановить
Well,
невозможно.
I think there's no stopping Elon Musk. He will do as he sees fit.
Надо искать
Nevertheless,
способы.
you need to find some common ground with him, search for ways to persuade him. I think he's a smart person, I truly believe he is. So you need to reach an agreement with him because this process needs to be formalized and subjected to certain rules.
Того, что будет происходить с ним в связи с развитием вот этих новейших исследований и технологий в генетике. либо-
Humanity has to consider what is going to happen due to the newest development in genetics
Поэтому
or in AI.
вот
One can
тогда,
make an
когда
approximate
человечество
prediction of what will
почувствовало
happen.
угрозу своему существованию от ядерного оружия, все начали обладатели ядерного
Once
оружия начали
mankind
между собой
felt an
договариваться,
existential
потому
threat
что
coming
понимали,
from
что
nuclear weapons,
аккуратное применение
all
может
nuclear
привести
nations
к
began to
полному
come to
тотальному
terms with
уничтожению.
one another
А
since
когда
they realized
наступит
the
понимание того,
negligent
что
use of nuclear weaponry could
беспредельное,
drive
бесконтрольное
humanity to
развитие
extinction.
искусственного интеллекта, либо генетики, либо еще каких-то современных направлений, остановить которые
It
невозможно.
is
Всё равно
impossible
это
to
следовать
stop
будет, так же,
research
как
in
невозможно
genetics
было
or
остановить
AI
всё
today,
в такую эпоху,
just as
как
it was
человечество.
impossible to
Невозможно
stop the use of gunpowder
исследовать
back in the
в той или
day.
другой области. Эти исследования все равно будут. Но когда человечество почувствует угрозу для себя,
But as soon as we
человечество в целом,
realize that the threat
тогда мы
comes from unbridled and uncontrolled
наступит
development of
период
AI, or
договариваться
genetics, or
на
any other
межгосударственном
field,
уровне о
the
том,
time will
как
come to reach an international agreement on how to regulate these things.
в этом смысле то, что
What is
происходит,
happening is, to a
неизбежно,
certain extent, an element of a civil war.
и все думают,
Everyone in
что
the West thinks that the
Запад
Russian
думает, что
people have been
боевые
split by
действия
hostilities
навсегда
forever.
растащили
No,
одну
they
часть
will be
другого,
reunited.
другого. Нет,
The unity is still there.
воссоединение произойдет. Оно никуда и не делось.
Why are the Ukrainian authorities dismantling the Ukrainian Orthodox Church?
Растаскивают русскую православную церковь.
Because it brings together not only the territory,
Объединяет не
it
территорию.
brings together our souls.
И
No
никому
one will be
не
able to
удастся
separate the
ее
soul.
разделить.